Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Aikins with my brother Fred Aikins. We're brothers in cars. And today we want to talk about something that a lot of people don't understand because it's kind of like sausage being made. But Fred has been in all sorts of different parts of the car market and the car industry during his 35 plus year career.
Actually 40 years as of this month, this
Ooh.
year. 40 years.
All right, 40 years.
My, how time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly. So I thought it might be kind of fun to ask Fred some questions about how does a car get conceived and how does it get designed and what's the whole process like to go from an idea to a rolled out, ready for the consumer uh, vehicle. And so, Fred, you've been involved with several different manufacturers over the years: Subaru, Mazda, Kia, um, along with doing some agency work for Honda. And I don't know if I'm missing anybody, but uh,
That's
you've
the
been
high
in
points.
you've been in the trenches, in other words.
Indeed.
So yes,
I have
so
the scars to prove it.
so what is the process? Who is in charge with coming up with ideas, and then how does that go up the chain of command to get approved to then go to the next phase? So I'll just let you kind of take it away.
Well, it's kind of a twofold process because on the one hand, if you've got an existing product line, let's say the Ford F-150, the Toyota Camry, the Honda Civic, where it's a well-established nameplate, then you don't have to sell senior management on let's build this particular vehicle. So you've taken that part of the equation that's already baked in to the program, and it's okay. How do we keep the ball rolling? Like on the F-150 for Ford, that's the damn franchise. If the F-150 flops in the market, they're in a world of hurt. In fact, the vultures start circling. Same thing with Toyota and the Camry. Same thing with Honda and the Civic or Accord. You know, you know what you're going to build. The question becomes, how do we build it better than what we have now? So that's one thing. But then on the other side, and I've worked on two of these programs. There's the clean sheet of paper, or what the conceptualists within the company, at the design center and in advanced product planning, what they call a white space vehicle. So you look at the marketplace as a whole and you go, okay, out of all these vehicles on the market, where's the white space? Where is an unmet need for the consumer? And when I was at Mazda, um, one of the early programs I worked on when I was at Mazda's PR agency was the soon to be announced Mazda Miata. And the idea behind that car really came from a couple of guys who were at the Mazda Design Center, the R&D center here in Irvine, California, and one of them, Bob Hall, was an ex-journalist, and they were sitting around idea generating in a sort of an idea session, and somebody said, what's missing in the market is a small, lightweight two-seat roadster. Now, if you think back to when that planning was going on, which is probably in the early to mid '80s, there had been in the '60s and '70s and into the '80s, there had been European two-seat roadsters.
Sure,
Uh,
like the MG and
the MGB,
Spitfire.
Triumph Spitfire, the Alfa Romeo, Spider, etc.
Mhm.
And those cars all got very long in the tooth. They stayed on the market way too long. The quality on those cars were, let's be charitable, abysmal. You know, the running joke on MGs was the parts falling off of this car are of the finest British craftsmanship. And so Bob was over in Japan and he suggested to the top guys at Mazda, who were already, out of all the Japanese car companies, the most risk takers. Remember, at this point they were still working on the rotary engine and making it work for the U.S. market. And they had the RX-7, but the RX-7 was steadily creeping up market. And they saw a need and said, if we can build this, if we can do this, we think there's a market for about 40,000, 50,000 of these a year here in the States. Can you Mazda build a car in that low volume profitably? And they said, yeah, we think we can. We'll have to use some parts off of other models and everything. There'll have to be some commonality, but we can even do a dedicated chassis, because Mazda's plants were so flexible that they could build multiple product lines on multiple products on the same assembly line, which is a direct contrast to, say, Ford or GM or Chrysler, where they take one big plant and they dedicate the entire plant's production to one model. And it's got to do a minimum of 250,000 to 500,000 vehicles every year to make money. Well, that's a tall order. But when Mazda came back and said, yeah, we can do a volume as low as 40 or 50,000 a year, that's what jump-started the Miata program. So the U.S. Design Center, they start sketching things and they start throwing things out. And once you've got the idea, then what you do is you basically assemble your long-term product planning teams and you put together what's called a concept trip or a proof of concept trip. And what they did was they went out and bought a couple of these vehicles. I think they bought an Alpha Spider. I know that they bought a used Lotus Elan as this is our idea. This is the purest expression of our idea. And they went out and did that. And they had a trip where they drove from Irvine up to Santa Barbara and all the wonderful roads around Santa Barbara. And by this point, the designers had sketched out a design and they had a prototype, an early prototype built of this basic layout: 4-cylinder engine, 4-wheel independent suspension with this really nice looking body. And a friend of mine, Norman Garrett, was on the development team, and they drove the competitor cars and this early prototype. It was basically a fiberglass model with running gear under it, and they drove it around Santa Barbara. And Norman said that they had people coming out of the woodwork, including they happened to stop in front of the Porsche dealership at a light, and they had people who were looking at 944s and everything in the Porsche dealership running out of the Porsche dealership to shout questions at them about what is it, who makes it, when's it coming out.
Not a bad sign.
Which for their Japanese compatriots, the guys from Japan, they're watching all this and their jaws drop.
Yeah, the ultimate focus group.
Yeah, I mean, it was the ultimate impromptu focus group. And so that's when so now you've got enough enthusiasm to say, okay, we can do this. This is a good idea. And that's when it goes dark, because it takes roughly 4 to 5 years to bring a car to market, from initial design sketches to on sale to the public. So let's call it
that's
four and
pretty.
a half years.
I'm sure that's kind of surprising to a lot of people that it takes that long, because especially in our society today, if you're not if you're not able to bring product to market within, say, 2 to 3 years, it's already passed you by in the age of technology.
Well,
And
exactly.
so,
And that's just it. With tech companies, and this is one of the reasons I think Apple had a real problem. They're used to going from concept to product on the shelf in 18 months to 2 years. So the time frame tripped them up. And they can do things very, very quickly, extremely quickly. But they can't do that. Now let's put the Miata aside for a second and talk about the other brand new vehicle that I worked on later in my career, which was the Kia Soul. And the Kia Soul, that again originated at the U.S. Design Center, and my good friend, the late Mike Torpy, was the designer of it. And his concept was, and I remember this vividly, his concept for the vehicle was basically a boar with a backpack. So if you think about Pumbaa from The Lion King, basically big in the front, smaller in the back, but it's sort of a bulldog stance, right?
right, the classic bulldog, yep.
Classic bulldog stance, but with a backpack on it. And so that was the initial concept. They built a show car, the Kia Soul show car, which I think they showed at Geneva in 2006. Now, Geneva is in March. So let's say March 2006, boom, here's this Kia Soul concept. And people loved it. Europe loved it. When we brought it over to the States, I think it was either for the Chicago or Detroit or New York, one of the auto shows after Geneva. It was, this is great, this is wonderful. Now remember, Scion had already done a couple of vehicles that were sort of boxy, quirky.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how long the Scion had been out by then.
Scion had been out since about 2005.
Okay.
So they sort of provided the impetus, but it wasn't until 2006 or so that Scion's sales numbers got everybody's attention, because they were selling at their peak 70,000 Scion XBs, which is a huge number for a box-shaped vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And Honda had the Element, and Nissan had something or other.
The Cube.
Nissan had the Cube, which was quirky. It was a Japanese domestic model, and so everybody was sort of moving into this, light utilitarian, what I called urban crossover vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's 2006. In late 2006, I led, along with the young product planner who was supposed to be in charge of the Soul, later left the company, and the Soul wound up in my lap. But we led this trip up to the Central Coast, a little bit north of Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, etc. And we had a PT Cruiser, we had a Honda Element, we had a couple other sort of quirky vehicles like that, Chevrolet HHR, and we had a Chrysler Pacifica.
The original Chrysler Pacifica.
Yeah, the original Chrysler Pacifica, which was kind of a tall wagon.
Yes.
It was it was definitely an outlier. It was a great vehicle to haul our luggage in. Other than that, it really wasn't that much fun. But anyhow, we did this proof of concept trip and got feedback. We tested the Soul with various focus groups, which is something that you do. You bring in consumers who have already identified themselves by driving a similar model out there in the marketplace. And you get that data from a data company, and you put this stuff together, and you ask them questions. What do you like? What do you not like? What are you looking for in a vehicle like this? And you find out things like, oh, we want it to be easy to get in and out of. We want the seats to be a little bit higher because cars have gotten so low that you want to be able to just, stand next to it and slide your butt over into the driver's seat without dropping down 6 or 8 inches into the seat. You do all these other things, and so you have this sort, like I said, it's a proof of concept, and then everything goes quiet for a couple of years while the engineering team figures out, okay, what components are we going to do? What chassis are we going to do? How are we going to design the chassis? Because show cars are notorious for not being buildable.
Right.
If you see a really, really attractive show car, for instance, I think the original Soul concept had clamshell doors, which means the front door opens conventionally and the rear doors are what they call suicide doors or coach doors, which is a less politically incorrect.
Like mid-60s Lincoln Continental.
Mid-60s Lincoln Continental, exactly. And those doors, designers love them. Car show designers love them because they let you open up the interior and show this big opening. Well, you know who hates big openings? The crash test guys.
Yes. the safety people.
The safety folks and the engineers. Well, because basically
you have no beat color.
You cut a big hole in the side of a vehicle, and what happens when one wheel hits a bump? The whole thing twists like it's a pretzel.
Yes.
And you get lots of squeaks and rattles. And having worked in product quality, the NVH guys hate big openings. Even hatchbacks are a problem because it's still a big opening in the body.
Right.
So anyhow, after you've done your proof of concept, you've tested it to say, okay, there's enough of an idea. There's a germ of an idea. Now, how do we bring it to market? Well, then you've got to figure out, okay, what's our powertrain going to be? Where are we going to get that? Where are we going to get the suspension components? Because unless you've got a product like the Mazda Miata, which had a completely new from the ground up suspension, you're going to have to, the Soul basically used bits and pieces of other Kia models, the Rio and the Forte. And so you take, it's like a Chinese menu, one from column A, one from column B, and you sort of mash them all together, and then you build prototypes. And you build prototypes and you test the prototypes. And the testing phase of the prototypes is about 18 months, maybe 2 years. And you run them in all kinds of conditions. You run them in Death Valley during the hottest days of the year. You run them in International Falls, Minnesota during the coldest days in late January and February. And you test everything to make sure it all works together, to find out if you've got any problems here and there with all these components that you've sort of sourced from all over and mashed together. And then once you've done that, you say, okay, we're going to come out with this vehicle, and you make a public announcement at usually a major auto show. So, for instance, the Soul made its public debut at, I think, the 2008 LA Auto Show. And we kind of went overboard. We had 18 Soul prototypes on the show floor. Now, typically, Kia would only have a maximum of about 18 vehicles total. So this was just one out of 7 or 8 Kia models, and we had 18 of them in various trims, in various colors, all of which yours truly had to organize all of the, the show car painting, because even when you've got a prototype, it comes over from the factory and you go, oh, the paint's not great. So you send it out and you say, okay, let's give this the best possible paint job. Here's the paint code. And the thing gets polished to a mirror-like shine. It's a little bit dishonest because the customer will never see a paint job as good as the show car. But that's because
there's a little show business in it.
There's a little Hollywood involved. Don't look behind the curtain. And but we did this with 18 vehicles. Yes, I was working 14, 16, 18-hour days. So anyhow, you do all of this, you get all these things ready, and you hope that when the media and the public see it, they go, wow, we can't wait for this to come out. Now, that didn't actually happen that much with the original Miata. With the Miata, the PR strategy was to show it to a select group of journalists very early. And okay, here's one of the early prototypes. And we took it to a remote location and we brought these journalists in and we said, this is what we're coming out with. Drive it. What do you think? Give us your feedback. Tell us what you think we've done right. And more importantly, tell us what you think we could have done better. And you get
and that had to be unusual for the industry.
At that point, it was fairly unusual.
Yeah,
because we did a little bit. I did a little bit of the same thing with the Soul a few years later.
Well, and that's anyhow. Yeah. Sorry to get you off track here, but that's one of the things with at the time you were working for Mazda's PR agency,
right?
And I think one of the things that is interesting about that is that you had a relationship with auto journalists and you kind of knew what made them tick and how they would receive certain things and so forth. Was that were you involved in recommending that you go that way with introducing it to the journalists?
Some of that was done actually before I joined Mazda's PR firm.
Oh, okay.
But I worked with the guys who had done it.
Got it.
Who put those crews together. I knew the journalists. And I later got this when we did the press introduction. I knew the people who had been the sneak preview type people.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, at this point, with the Miata, we told a select few journalists, but they were sworn to secrecy. They couldn't say, hey, Mazda's coming out with something really cool, but we can't tell you about it. They couldn't say anything.
Right.
So what Mazda did, though, and Mazda's PR firm, was we said, okay, now we're going to show it at the Chicago Auto Show in February of 1989. The Miata was going to come out middle of that year as a 1990 model. And at the Chicago Auto Show, they pull the silk off, and there this thing is. And what happened next has been basically described as Miata mania, because the media went nuts. Even outlets that you would not think would give a damn about a brand new two-seat sports car. I was
Convertible
fielding
sports car.
convertible sports car. I was fielding phone calls from People magazine because they wanted to talk to the people behind the Miata because it was that popular. I was fielding call. We were getting calls from CNN. We were getting calls from, again, outlets that normally don't give a damn about cars in general, and certainly not small sports cars from a little Japanese car company.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and even the general public, dealers were setting up waiting lists. And dealers being dealers, some of them were saying, okay, I'll sell you one of the first ones that comes in, but you're going to pay me $10,000 over sticker.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is for a car that started at $13,800.
Yeah.
So they're getting an 80% premium or 70% premium over the list price. And people are gladly, it's like that.
Handing over their money.
Hey, take my money. Here's my wallet. Take my money.
And one thing that I just want to interject here that I remember when you were working on that, and when the Miata was introduced, or first information was leaking about it, was the fact that it was rear wheel drive. Because at that time you had things like the Honda Del Sol and a couple other vehicles, but everything was front wheel drive. It seemed, unless you're talking about a truck.
Because that's easier and cheaper. Mm-hmm. And Mazda did, and to their credit, Mazda did their due diligence, and they looked at a front wheel drive platform, and that they did enough work that front wheel drive platform, which was based off of the 323 economy car, Ford wound up buying it and building the Mercury Capri. The late unlamented Mercury Capri convertible. You can see how well that worked out for them.
Yes.
The Capri wasn't a bad car. It just wasn't a Miata.
No.
So anyhow, back to doing the introduction.
Yeah.
So after you've done all of the testing and you've done all the focus groups and everything else, you're ready to come to market. You build a bunch of prototypes, and then you do what's called a long lead introduction. This is back when car magazines especially had long lead times, typically about 3 months. So we did the long lead for the Miata on Oahu in Hawaii in, I think it was late February, after the Chicago Auto Show debut. So now the car is broken cover. It's out in the public domain, and I want to say we had 20, maybe it was 25, but it was a bunch, and we had multiple waves of journalists coming in, flying in, going through all these presentations, doing an autocross, driving around the island of Hawaii, and getting all of this public adulation. And of course, Hawaii is wonderful because you have people from not only all around the United States, but all around the world.
Right.
And people are they're looking at these things, and they're just, every time they stopped at the stoplight, what is that? What is that? So of course now the media people feel like rock stars.
Yeah, I was going to say,
which is never a bad thing when the guy
driving sitting in your car.
Yeah, when the guy sitting in your car is getting an ego stroke.
From the I was going to say that normally with
especially from let's be honest, girls in bikinis.
Yeah, all right. Well,
there's no downside to that.
No, and with, I would think that that's not normally how it works when you're trying to get journalists to come to your your long lead or your rollout, well, maybe there's a core that they're always interesting because that's their job.
Yeah, that's their
But
job.
but there had to be maybe a little bit more enthusiasm and a
Oh
little bit more
yes.
interest
Oh
than
yes. No,
than the usual.
and we were getting people from outlets, like I said, that we don't normally get. Um, I'm tr- I remember there was one guy from Town and Country magazine. Um, Now, Town and Country is one of those wonderful, you know, Northeast elite Tony magazines, sort of like Architectural Digest, but for people who live in the
Right.
suburbs and the exurbs. And it's like, yeah, where they talk like Thurston Howell the Third.
Yes, I was going to say, did was he in Hawaii wearing a tweed jacket and smoking a pipe?
No, blue blazer and an ascot. But
Perfect.
he was he was exactly who, straight out of Central Casting.
Yeah.
And you know, some of the media who were on the original trip, they basically came back to after driving it in Hawaii, came back to the States and immediately called my counterparts who were in Mazda PR and placed their orders for a car.
Wow.
One guy I know used to be at Road and Track, Dennis Simonitis, still has his original 1990 Miata Mariner Blue with the last three of the VIN, with the last numbers on the VIN being 0090.
Wow.
That's one of the earliest vehicles for sale.
And when they first rolled out, they were available in red, white, and blue, right?
Exactly. Eventually, they added silver and black and a couple of other colors. But
And later British Racing Green, I believe.
That was a 91. That was the 91 BRG Special Edition. They also did a bright yellow in 92, which was called Sunburst Yellow. The neat thing about that, there was a $250 upcharge for the yellow paint because they had to run it through the paint shop twice to get the coverage right.
Got it.
Because otherwise the paint was too thin.
So contrast that with the Soul. Because so you have 18 of them at the LA Auto Show. Everybody's seeing it. What was the reaction?
We get great media response from the LA Auto Show. So at that point, now I've got to get a bunch of prototypes ready for the long lead press introduction, which was held in Miami. Now, Miami is not usually a great place to launch a vehicle because I don't know if you've checked any time recently. Florida is flat as hell.
Yes.
And there really aren't any driving roads. But that wasn't the point.
Mm-hmm.
The point was this was a vehicle to see and be seen in. So we stayed at this nice hotel. While we were there, Britney Spears and her entourage were there.
Mm-hmm.
Little known factoid. And we did the introduction of the Soul in Miami. And it started on March 9th, 2009. I remember that date precisely because March 9th, 2009 was the absolute bottoming out of the Dow Jones.
The great financial crisis, stock crash.
I mean, I think, what was it? The Dow dropped as low as 6,000 and something.
Yeah, the S&P lost over half of its value.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the bottom of the dip. And
I was new in the financial advice business at the time, and people were honestly questioning whether the dollar was going to have any value. They thought it was never coming back. They thought the whole system was going to collapse. So it wasn't the best time to be introducing something new for people.
I remember this. And I'm going, oh my God, we've introduced this product into a financial meltdown.
Yes.
What are we thinking? And Kia, if you recall, was just coming off of another debacle. The 2009 Mazda Borrego 3-row SUV. One model year, 2009. One model year that sold for 4 model years.
It was a Mazda?
Excuse me, Kia.
Okay.
Kia Borrego.
Okay.
I misspoke. The Kia Borrego. In its own way, not a bad vehicle, but it was launched into the teeth of $4.50 and $5 a gallon gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fairly thirsty and offered a V6 and a V8. And basically it went over like a fart in church. It failed to clear the tower on liftoff. And
other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play?
At one point, I joked to one of our sales guys or distribution guys. I said, because there was a hurricane coming into the Southeast. I said, can we just take all of the Borregos that we have and shove them down into the port of Brunswick, Georgia, or the port of Houston, and just let nature take its course and collect on the insurance money? Yeah. I mean, it landed with a thud. So that, of course, I'm thinking, oh God, this is happening again. We're gonna get our teeth kicked in. Well, the nice thing about the Soul, it was affordable, mm-hmm. It was economical, and it was a hit right out of the box. So within 3 months, the Soul outsold the Scion XB that we had been targeting.
Wow.
Just smoked it. Nissan introduced the Cube. Ironically, they introduced the Cube at a hotel in Miami a month after we did. So, great minds think alike, right?
Yep.
But they launched the Cube, and the Cube just fell flat on the market because it wasn't the Soul.
Right.
It was
very conservatively styled.
Well,
and
no,
it was Japanese. Well,
it was
conservative.
Very Japanese.
That it was very boxy. It had a wraparound window on one of the back pillars.
It had all kinds of quirks, and it was weird.
Yeah,
you could get an insert for the dash that was shag carpeting. Think about that. I mean, I give them an A for creativity, but an F for execution.
Yeah.
So that's what it's like to bring a vehicle to market, and then once they get to market, then you got to sell them. And cars like the Miata, well, they sell themselves as long as you don't screw up on the pricing or the marketing.
Or it's not built well, or it has safety problems,
or it's slapped together.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we didn't have that problem with either the Miata or later with the Soul. They were pretty well built. And so if you look at Kia's ascendancy in the market, you can trace it right back to the Soul in early 2009, let's say June of 2009. And the sales curve looks like a hockey stick.
Yeah.
Because it just kicks up. And then Kia thankfully followed it up with a bunch of other good designs that took the company from 250,000 vehicles to 750,000 vehicles.
So I have a question. So you've given us a good overview. Tell me a little bit about the friction, for lack of a better word, between the designers and the engineers and the bean counters, the people who are looking at cost, because that's got to be a little bit of a push and pull.
Yes. Actually, typically the designers and the engineers are at least on similar paths. The designers sometimes want stuff that's just not practical. And and you have to sort of, but if you get the right designers, you get designers who are actually car guys and who can appreciate the engineering that goes into the vehicles, that makes your life a lot easier. With the Miata, you had designers who were all hardcore car guys, and so they knew things had to work. So again, I'll go back to my friend Norman at Mazda. He did what amounts to a dissertation that he presented to Japan on how the shifter should feel in the Miata. And he pushed this and he pushed this and he wanted it to be just a flick of a wrist.
Oh, it's like this long a throw.
Yeah, it's very like 2.5 inches for the shift throw. But the engineers at Mazda were able to accomplish that, and they learned things that helped them on the RX-7 and other vehicles.
Hmm.
Because once they saw that was one of the key selling points of the vehicle, then you get this sort of institutional learning where people go, oh, this is how it's supposed to work. This is how it's supposed to come together.
Right.
This is wonderful. And once that happens, and you get, when it all comes together, as I said to members of my team when we were doing the Miata introduction, we were working, again, 10, 12, 14-hour days, just fielding media calls and getting vehicles to media that we normally didn't deal with, and answering questions and all this other stuff. And I said to my people, I think I took them to lunch or dinner. I said, enjoy this while it lasts, because this is not normal. But you will look back on this and remember exactly what you were doing and what it felt like to have a hit. Because most of the media, especially the ones that had been around for a while, the last vehicle that they could remember causing that much of a public clamor in the marketplace was the original Ford Mustang. Now, Mazda didn't hit Ford Mustang sales numbers, but it was never supposed to.
Right.
The Miata was supposed to do about 50,000 vehicles worldwide. I think it topped out at 60, maybe 65, 70,000 units globally.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time the Miata was out and the RX-7 was still going strong, Mazda became, in 1991, the world's largest manufacturer of sports cars.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Mazda sports cars, from a little tiny company based in Hiroshima, Japan, outsold the Chevrolet Corvette, all of Porsche, the Nissan Z-Car, all of these other iconic sports car brands, blew past them like they were standing still.
And the fact that it's still being made in
it's still around
iteration
35 years later.
Yeah.
35 years later.
And you can still look at it and say, yeah, it's a Miata or an MX-5, but
that was a dalliance.
Yes.
Here in the US market, they got Mazda wised up and went back to the Miata nameplate.
Right. But in a way, it's kind of the Japanese version of the 911, the Porsche 911.
And
where they just keep refining it and refining it and refining it.
And if you look, for a period, the first generation was a pure expression. The second generation, they sort of rounded off some of the sharp edges. They made it a little bit bigger, a little bit softer. The third generation is where they started to go astray. And the third generation, fortunately, cooler head, smarter people prevailed, and they said, no, we have to drag it back to what it was originally.
It was getting too heavy, too big.
It started to get big, it started to get heavy, and the design that they came up with didn't have the same purity of design. The fourth generation, which is the one I own now, that is as pure an expression of the Miata as the original.
Hmm.
The only stuff it has is stuff that's needed for regulatory reasons.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Soul, they've done the same. Kia's done the same thing. The second generation, which I worked on, they smoothed over some of the rough edges, but they kept the essence of the vehicle. Same thing with the third generation. And
Yeah.
hopefully they're smart enough to keep evolving it like Mazda has with the Miata and Porsche has with the 911.
I just want to circle back. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to the question I was asking with the so the people who are counting the dollars and cents.
Yes, I didn't answer that question.
No, it's all right. It's great that you went there, the direction you went.
There's always going to be this tension between the designers and the product planners and everybody, and the people building the car, because of course engineering would like to put in all kinds of whiz bang solutions that maybe don't have the same value for money. With the bean counters, they're constantly under pressure to, okay, we're going to have to, we have to take content out of the vehicle. We have to make it cheaper, or we're going to have to sell it for more. Well, that original $13,800 Miata, and I think that was also the price of the original Soul, or very close to. It was under $14,000 for the Soul, but you know, there's always pressure. There's always cost pressures, and you either have to take equipment out, or you have to find a way that you can put enough value into the car that you can raise the price a little bit. And once you raise the price a bit, then you can get, as long as you keep hitting your profitability targets, that's what matters.
Okay. Because sometimes you have people who will be making some comments about, well, it's only adding this particular feature only adds, $15 to the vehicle. Oh, but I remember you saying there were times when you'd be talking to the Koreans or the Japanese back at the factory, et cetera, and you'd be saying, well, we really need to have this feature, but then they'd be pushing back that it would add $15 or $100 to the cost of the vehicle. That's too much. And to the lay person, they say, what do you mean that's too much? It's $15, it's $100. What's the big deal?
Well, that's per unit. And if you start multiplying that by or the original sales targets on the Soul were basically 40,000 a year with a stretch goal of 60,000. We blew through that in the first, I think, 8 or 9 months. And the next year, we did over 100. The Soul eventually topped out at 120,000 units. So double the original stretch goal.
So $100 extra on 120,000 units is $12 million.
Right. But when you start putting it on that many vehicles, all of a sudden, it's not $100 a vehicle, it's $75.
Right. You get the economy of scale.
You get an economy of scale, and all of a sudden the numbers start making sense.
Right. Well, I find this all fascinating, and thank you for taking us down that memory lane in a way, but also helping shed light on what the process is, kind of soup to nuts,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely. No, it's
getting a vehicle
this
to
is
market.
the reason I've spent 40 years in this business, is
Yeah,
because, as you can tell, it gets me revved up.
right.
It gets me excited.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's
like
why I've
this.
spent
Yeah.
most of my career in product planning and product development,
Yeah.
because that's
It's
that's
your
where it's great.
passion. Yeah.
Yeah,
You can always tell
that's
when
where the
something is somebody's passion because they just love to talk about it, and you can tell they love what they're talking about.
exactly. So at some point we can probably talk about, you know, once the vehicle comes to market and how you market it and everything else. And but
Yeah, I think that would
that's a
be
subject for another time.
yeah, I think that would be maybe a good um
Follow
episode
up.
on its own. And then we can get into some things like dealer relationships with the manufacturers and
Yeah, and why do some really well received vehicles come out and then flop?
yep.
Uh,
Or how
case
do
in point,
yeah, go ahead.
case in point would be the PT Cruiser.
Yeah.
PT Cruiser was the hottest thing on wheels for about 3 years, and then it just
Right.
died. Or the Honda Element. Some of the other vehicles that that came out, made a big splash, and then just died.
Yeah.
And sometimes somebody gets the marketing wrong. Sometimes somebody gets the pricing wrong. Uh,
Yeah.
Jeep Jeep did that with the Gladiator. The Gladiator, when it was announced, everybody said this is a license to print money. They are going to be printing money and printing money, and now I think they've got $15,000 on the hood, and they're struggling. What happened? Well, if you look at the price curve, you know they started reading their own press releases and what a great hit it was, and it came out, and people went, "Oh my God, this thing is 50, 60, $80,000 if you get a fully loaded one. That's nuts. I can get a much better F-150 for that."
Right.
Or
Yeah, the
fill in the blank.
quirkiness, yeah, the quirkiness of kind of the Wrangler body with the bed, you're getting the true believers, the Jeep
Well,
people, Jeep
that's
guys.
just it. And the other thing is, the Gladiator, as cool as it is, doesn't work very well as a pickup truck.
It doesn't, no.
And like most Jeeps, it has the aerodynamics of a barn, and that creates wind noise.
Yeah,
Lots and lots and lots of wind noise.
right.
And you drive one of those across Nebraska, and you're going, you're ready to stick an ice pick in your ear.
All right, on that happy note, uh, no, this has been a great discussion. I hope people find it as interesting as I did. And I've heard a lot of these stories, but I've never really gotten walked through the whole thing. Plus the stories about kind of behind the scenes, what happened and so forth. So thanks a lot, Fred.
Oh,
And we'll do this again soon. Maybe we'll do part two, talking about what can go wrong, what the process is for really making a success durable, and what the secret of that is, if there is a secret, or what some of the pitfalls are. So
absolutely.
hope everybody enjoyed this latest episode of Brothers in Cars. If you have any thoughts about what you first thought of the Miata or the Kia Soul when they rolled out, go ahead and put them in the comments below. And as always, any feedback is great. If you like this, please click the like button, and even more importantly, the subscribe button just takes a couple of seconds. And that way, anytime we release a new video, you'll be notified. Oh, and click that bell too. So take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.